Previously on Donkey Kong Country. And now we're moving on to the moon of Endor to destroy the shield generator or something. Hello everybody! Welcome back to Retro Replay as we move on to World 3 of Donkey Kong Country. In the first two worlds, I was able to talk a lot about my experience playing the games as a kid because since I was A, bad at games, and B, wanted to play the same levels over and over again, I knew just about everything I could talk about for these first two worlds. Compare that to World 3 here and beyond, I haven't really played these levels that much. Case in point, we are about to get another stupid death. Okay, truth be told, the reason that I had such a bad mishap there is because I missed the chance to get the golden K earlier, so I used the rewind feature on the Switch Online system, and I had made a promise to myself, if I use the rewind I have to sacrifice a life and then restart. So that's what we're doing here. Swinging back around to my initial topic, when we were little, my brother and I did manage to reach this world and a little bit further, but we never played it too often. We always wanted to go back to Jungle Hijinks or Minecart Madness and the levels we were used to. And then we got rid of our Super Nintendo, so years passed, and then I never got a chance to play this game again until years later when it finally came out on the Nintendo Wii Virtual Console. That was a big event. We were really excited when we were little and we saw the news that it was coming to the virtual shop for the Wii. It was a lot of fun. We immediately went back through, unlocked our favorite classic stages, made sure that we had the save files in order to do so, and for the first time ever, I actually managed to play through and beat it all, which was a lot of fun. We skipped on the Wii U eShop release because, well, we already had it on the Wii, so we didn't feel the need to buy it again. But when the game dropped for Switch Online for the SNES library, we were excited. Played through it again, beat it again, but since it is Switch Online, it had the wonderful gimmick of the rewind feature. Like I stated earlier, for this playthrough, if I ever rewound, I would force myself to give up a life on the stage. But it has been a lot of fun and kind of interesting to think about, especially with the later stages, how challenging this game is, especially since I don't know every nook and cranny of every level. And since I'm mostly playing these through for the third or fourth time in my life, I don't exactly have a whole lot I can talk about that relates to the levels because, well, I don't know them inside and out. So I guess I can just think about things that the background reminds me of. I never really grew up around a forest or anything like that. I lived in a cul-de-sac near a small suburb, so not a whole lot of opportunity for greenery. But there was a really beautiful creek very close to where I lived as a kid. It was a small little park in the Colonial Hills area of town, mostly used by folks walking their pets or just trying to get their daily exercise. One thing that the kids did a lot, especially during the winter, there was a big hill nearby the creek, and kids could sled down it. It was probably one of the fastest hills I've ever slid down as a kid. It wasn't necessarily tall or anything like that. Keep in mind, this is Central Ohio, and we don't exactly have the biggest of mountains or anything like that. But the hill was a very steep incline. So even though it wasn't necessarily the tallest hill in the world, it was a pretty darn steep hill, and that led to a lot of fast moments down the mountain. Be it sledding in the winter, or sometimes when we got older, we rode our bikes down during the summer, and it was a pretty interesting experience. But then of course there was the creek itself. That fed into a river that was a fair distance away from where we lived, but it had some pretty stunning scenery if you walked far enough along it. Further closer to the main high street, there was this large tunnel. I forget what it was called, but it was like a man-made structure that was supposed to help with the flow of water during storms. But walking through it, you came out onto this small little pond feeding into the rest of the creek. When you emerged from the tunnel, there were some beautiful moments of this little pond with some koi fish that I think either naturally lived there or got left behind by some other previous tourists or hikers. And then that little pond fed into the rest of the creek that fed to the river. I never went much farther beyond that as a kid, but I always remembered it was such a beautiful sight to see that growing up. Land alive, I've been talking so long about the creek, we've already made our way to the Treetop Village stage. If you look closer, I think you can see an Ewok and maybe Han, Leia, and Luke all celebrating the fact that the Death Star was destroyed up until they build the third one in the sequel. I would like to talk about Star Wars, I do like it, but I think I want to save that for a future Retro Replay series. So for now, I'll just say, I guess, Return of the Jedi is my second or third favorite Star Wars movie, depending on how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking about at the time. Empire Strikes Back is still the best Star Wars movie ever made, in my opinion, though, so now that I've ticked off all the little kids who grew up with the prequel trilogy instead of the original trilogy, I'll leave it at that, because, like I said, I want to save talking about Star Wars as a whole for a later series. In the meantime, back to it, as we inch ever closer to the end of this stage. This is a fun one. I think maybe of all the post-World 1 and 2 stages, this is one of my favorites, simply based on its level design. I think, if I remember right, there's only one more stage that's developed like this for the rest of the game, similar to the temple levels, so it is a lot of fun to experience something a bit more unique as compared to the same general fare as with most of the other levels. In terms of general design, as this is more of a unique setting as compared to the majority of jungle levels in the game. And with that out of the way, we got ourselves another Kong, we'll get ourselves another Espresso emblem, and that's the stage. Nice. With that done, we now move on to level 3 of World 3. Hey, hey! And seeing as how this whole world has been themed around birds and beings of the forest, our first enemy is naturally a Kremling. Okay, it does make sense thematically since this is a mission to get the bananas back from King K. Rool and the Kremlings, but I do find it kind of funny that the Kremlings are the main enemy here for this level as opposed to more birds and bees and what have you. Of course, as a kid, I didn't know the tech that you could just roll with Diddy Kong and then get a mid-air jump to get bonus items in the middle of the stage, so there were a lot of bonuses that I missed out on when I got to these later stages when I was younger, playing on the Wii Virtual Console. And with that, there's another secret and some more Kremlings. Whee! I still can't get over the funny little animations that the characters do for all their little movements. Oh, and that cost me Donkey Kong, but I'm not dead yet! And of course it's just after I lose the DK barrel. Oh my gosh, all these bees. Okay, so I do have a slight phobia of bees because I got stung quite a few times when I was a kid and growing up. I think the last time I got stung was actually when I was working at the golf course in the summer of 2018. And since bees always just flap their wings really loud whenever they either are trying to defend themselves or something, it always just stuck in my head. I think the first time I ever got stung by a bee, I was at a train museum with my family out in Colorado. I was looking at this water pump, and I remember this one or two bees just slowly floated up towards my head, and I tried to back away slowly, but then it just flew up next to my ear and stung me. They always go for my ear, I don't know why. At the pool, accidentally hit one with a towel, ear. Golf course, just accidentally disturbed the nest, tried to back away quickly, ear. Like, what the flip? It was definitely something that really stuck with me, and especially once we get to the boss of this world, you'll see something that kind of stuck with me. Oh, there I go. Well then, I'll speed things up and keep continuing with my story. The final boss for this world is a giant bee. I forget the official name they have for this in the game, but it is one that has kind of just sort of stuck in the back of my head. Like I mentioned earlier, the bees in this game have a really unique sound. So whenever I hear it, it just always sticks in the back of my head, like, oh, I hear that buzzing. It gives me a, not necessarily PTSD, but rather just an unpleasant memory. And even then, the stings aren't my most prominent memories, but rather the less harmful bees I had to deal with when I was growing up. We had a small little play fort in our backyard, and we actually had a ton of carpenter bees living there. If you've never heard of carpenter bees, they're pretty much harmless. All they have is just no stingers, they fly around and do their own thing. As far as I can tell, they're really good for pollination and helping with the process of the planet. But they make the same loud buzzing sound that just triggers that memory for me, and even though they probably would never wish to hurt me, they probably just bump into me to say please leave us alone, I still have some sort of just bad flashbacks here and there from time to time. Which is why I'm glad that we're gone for them for the majority of the rest of this world, and we're on to the, oh, and we got ourselves a Ramby stage. Once again, we'll skip ahead. I just missed out on the double, but I still got extra lives. Back to the stage. As I was saying, we are on to the, I believe, the last temple stage in this entire game. Once again, it does seem strange that such a unique design was only used twice throughout the entire game. I understand the need to use the jungle aesthetic because Donkey Kong, but having some variety in the levels wouldn't hurt for the future. And even then, it makes the lore part of my brain twitch a little bit. I know that these platformers, the lore is not exactly something that's a big focus, especially in these old SNES games, but it makes me think, between the mines, these temples, and a few other future stages, what are all these doing here on Donkey Kong's island? If the whole thing is supposed to be like Donkey Kong lives here, he's in charge here. I believe it was the terminal montage something about Donkey Kong video that said like, oh, the Kremlings are responsible for the mines and such. Okay, that's one thing, but at the same time, how do you explain all these ancient ruins unless it's supposed to be like, oh, somebody took over when Donkey Kong arrived, or there was an ancient civilization that went out and now it's a Planet of the Apes situation. Land alive, why am I thinking about this hard? It's a Donkey Kong game, not freaking Kingdom Hearts. Well, it gives me something to think about instead of just focusing on this fairly easy bonus minigame here. I'm glad that there are minigames like this that aren't just restrictive to like, oh, you can only gain a lot of extra lives through playing the Animal Companion bonus stages. This gives you a chance to practice your timing skills, and that's a lot of fun. And I forgot, it gives you animal tokens instead of lives. Well, it'll lead to extra lives later down the road, so no harm, no foul, I suppose. Back to the level then. I'll probably eventually play the future Donkey Kong Country games, and then I can see what exactly the other games were like. But also at the same time, I kind of want to maybe try the reboot games that they did for Donkey Kong Country. Initially on the Wii and Wii U, and then got ported to Switch. I've heard nothing but good things about those games, and they would be a fun one to add to my collection to play games on this channel. That's still a ways away though. I need to focus on beating this game first, because land alive, the further I get into this game, the trickier the stages get. I've got this level to beat, and then I've got a water level right after this one, and I'm almost to the amount of time it took me to beat World 2 last time. Oof. But we'll get there. Not like that. Well then. I guess it's time to start speeding things back up again. Here we go.
Donkey Kong, he's the leader of the bunch. You know him well. He's finally back to kick some tail. His coconut gun can fire in spurts.
You know, the song says all that, but it seems like Diddy's been the one carrying us for the most part to this point. Alright, we just get over these gaps and try not to trip up once again. I've been racking my brain trying to think, like, what could I talk about in terms of temples? Indiana Jones? No, I might want to save that for a potential future video. The ruins of a city I've visited? I've never really visited any ruins. The closest I've been is maybe a seedier part of Pittsburgh, and even then, that's a stretch. Pittsburgh is a pretty nice city if you look in the right places. But enough about that, we've got the Orangutan Gang. Unless I miss my guess, given the general nature of the last 3 worlds of this game, this might be the last jungle-themed level. Kinda crazy because I was just complaining about like, oh, lack of variety, but we're about to hit a couple worlds with a bit more variety, which is kind of interesting. Well, it gives me a chance to talk a bit more about this music one last time before we head off. I don't know who composed the music for this game, but they did a really great job. Not just the general levels, but also the boss themes, King K. Rool's final boss, Gangplank Galleon. Everything about the score is great. It's not my favorite soundtrack in the world, but it's a lot of fun. It's got a great beat, got a great sound, and it always gets my nostalgia gears a-turning. Oop, hello Espresso. One of the few times we actually see Espresso in a normal stage. And like I said in this bonus stage, he's kinda useless in a normal stage. I'm sure there's some secret in the stage that he helps access, but it's not exactly easily accessible if he dies at the drop of a hat. But with that, I think this is the first time we've seen these orangutans who throw barrels on the stage. It kinda reminds me of this little rubber tire my brother and I would use to roll around at our great-grandfather's house in Akron. He used to work for Goodyear Tires, and as I believe it was a retirement gift, they gave him a little tiny rubber tire with a small glass tray in the middle as a sort of ashtray. My brother and I would always poke the glass out of it, because it was easy to remove, and just roll the tire back and forth across the living room. It was goofy, but we had so much fun doing it. One of the favorite memories I have of that place. I never got to actually see the Goodyear factory up in Akron because, well, it was closed by the time I was born. My great-grandfather was well past retirement by the time that I was old enough to start remembering visiting him more often than not. But it was always a happy memory whenever we did that. After he passed away, a lot of the trips afterwards were just making trips back to Akron so we could wrap up his estate, take care of things, start packing things up, and it was one of the last few trips I ever took there. My brother and I were just sitting in the living room, we rolled the tire one last time. It was kind of a bittersweet moment because we were saying goodbye to a place we had a lot of happy memories in, and that's the last time I've actually ever been to Akron as far as I can remember. No, it wasn't. I at least had one trip, because my dad lived in Akron, so we had a few high school reunions where I visited Akron again. I never saw the house again, but I've been to Akron a few times since then. Last time, though, it's definitely around 2010, though. Maybe it was earlier than that, maybe it was later than that. All I know is definitely before I went to high school. Actually, in that case, it definitely was earlier, maybe around 2007, 2008. Because it was a high school reunion. We were actually at a lake in Akron. There was a bit of a barbecue going on. Folks were catching up, seeing each other again. It was a lot of fun. But I remember most of that particular trip at the lake. Obviously, we swam a little bit, went out to the little dry dock they had just past the shore. But I also remember there was a volleyball court that instead of sand, it had like carpet over concrete. I'm not entirely sure why, but my brother and I, we just grabbed the volleyball, went to the court, and started playing soccer. Yeah, we just kept ducking under the volleyball net because we were still small enough to do so. And we were like, well, soccer's better, so let's play soccer. A few other kids who were visiting, be it for the reunion or for just visiting the lake for a picnic that day because it was a nice day, they joined us, we ended up playing a few games, and that was a lot of fun. Forget how many kids joined us that day, but I think we had enough for 5-on-5 or 6-on-6 soccer on the tiny little volleyball court. It was kinda hilarious. Usually whenever people wanted to take breaks, it was whenever the swim break was over and kids were allowed to go back into the lake and take a swim after the lifeguards took their break. My brother and I think my brother would enjoy swimming again. I was fine to just go back to the shelter and get some food and a drink before everybody was ready to start playing soccer again. And given how much I'm talking about soccer, you might think, oh, he must have played soccer as a kid for rec leagues and things like that. I did! For about 2 or 3 seasons, and then I spent most of my summers playing baseball. Both were a lot of fun, and I ended up playing both baseball and soccer in rec league when I went off to college. Mostly soccer by the end, though. By the time that I finished my freshman year of college, intramural baseball was discontinued, so I mostly just played soccer with my marching band friends. And since I'm now a full-fledged adult and it would cost me a lot more money than it did in college to play sports today, I would like to maybe try and playing them again, but as of right now, with my day job and this and all these other things, I might have to wait a little bit before that can happen again. Starting with working on my platforming skills, because land alive, that should have been an easy obstacle to avoid just to get that little extra winky item. Man, I shouldn't have talked as much trash as I did about how, oh, the water levels are easier here in Donkey Kong when I'm going to do stuff like this more often than not. But all is not lost. Even though I just lost a life here, since I made it to the halfway barrel, not far from that is yet another winky emblem, and that means I can get some more extra lives. Cool, let's skip ahead of this one real quick. Bada bing, bada boom. And just like that, we're back, and now we begin a montage of all my deaths because I can't somehow figure out this stage.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Huh. I honestly expected that montage to last a lot longer. I could have sworn it was longer.
Space is warped and time is bendable.
Ah well. We finally reached the exit. I believe this is either the last or one of the next to last water levels. And with that, we move on to a semi-original boss, Bumblebee Rumble. It's still based off a grunt enemy, but unlike the other two we fought so far, this one won't repeat. But like I mentioned earlier, given my phobia of bees, even hearing this little buzz sort of sends like a little shiver down my spine. I think I might have had like 1 or 2 nightmares about this boss when I was really little, and that does have everything to do with the fact that most of the stings I received were on my ears, so that is a very much prominent thing that happened. Like, I hear that buzzing in my ears, and my ears are the first target that the bees go for some reason. Like I talked about, even though it's not necessarily an original enemy design, this boss fight's a lot more original because instead of jumping on the enemy, you actually have to use barrels. One final throw! And there he goes. With that, we have completed World 3. Thank you so much for watching this newest episode of Retro Replay. Please like, share, and subscribe. I hope you'll stick around for more, and I will see you guys next time.